Hi everyone and welcome to one of this month's real-time tutorials. And this month I'm starting a new series based on painting textures. And we're going to start off with a very soft, fluffy cushion that Gigi the brindle greyhound was lying on. And it's so important to be able to paint different textures. So I'm going to try and cover as many in this series as possible, and I'll give you 2 or 3 of them this month to get us going. So I hope you enjoy the tutorial. Here are the list of colours that I've used for the cushion, and I hope you enjoy seeing this come together. So I used pastel matte paper for this project, and I really wanted to compare it to the velour paper that I'm used to and see if I could create the same softness on this paper as I get on the velour. And the first thing I do is pick up some dark 14, which seems like quite a dark colour to start with, but I'm searching out all of those darker creases, and I really want to make sure that I create enough depth with some darker colours before adding any highlight colours. And it's really the same technique that I use on any paper. But my main challenge here was to see if I could create the same fuzzy softness as I love to get on the velour paper. And I must admit this did take me quite a while longer than normal, just as I figured things out. And next I've got some BE36, another dark shade. Just really looking at the photo reference at the moment, trying to pick out some of the darker creases and little areas of shadow. Like this spot just underneath the dog's head. There are a lot of creases in that area. Anywhere where the dog makes contact with the cushion, I've got some complicated creases to deal with. And now BE27. Because the photograph was taken inside, you can see quite a lot of different colours in the cushion, as if some warm light is shining from above. And to be honest, I really wasn't sure what colours to go for. I never know exactly what I'm doing at the beginning. It is a little bit of trial and error. But I wanted to initially lay down some colours with a lot of warmth in it, so that later on my highlights on top of this would still have that nice warmth shining through. And even at this stage, I'm just experimenting with how the paper feels and how it blends. Pastel applies really nicely onto pastel matte. But like all good pastel papers, you really need to get a few layers on there before you're able to blend and move things around. And using some A21 now, and you'll notice that there's very little difference between this colour that I'm using and the colour of the paper. But no matter, just to get a layer of this on there really activates the paper, gets some layers of pastel on there and allows me to start moving things around. So it's quite a good choice of colour, this paper, for this project. So far this has been my favourite colour of pastel matte. I've used it a couple of times, both for animals and people now. And it's a really good mid-tone shade. If in doubt for what colour of paper to use, I always suggest going for a good mid-tone, either a sandy colour or a light grey. It's always easier working from a mid-tone than from pure white. And now I'm just starting to try and pick out some of the highlight at the back of the cushion. Just trying to make a nice crisp edge between the back of the cushion and the colour behind the dog. And you can see that I simplified the background in this piece. I just did a very simple gradient in the background. And now throughout this tutorial, I will use little bits of time lapse here and there just to speed things up. Here you can see I'm just trying to place where some of those creases in the cushion will appear. And you really can't afford to go a lot darker than you initially think. Later on, you'll want some of that depth to shine through. And it's always good to have your dark colours down, as these wonderful pastel papers allow so many more layers on top, and you can always bring your values up. And I just want to mention at this stage roughly how long this cushion took me to create. I spent a good couple of days, maybe 2.5 days alone, just working on this cushion area and the carpet below. There is always a lot of questions to me about how long something takes, and people always seem to feel worried about how slow they are or how long it takes them to create a background. And I too remember feeling that way. For some reason, I imagined that I could spend 3 days on the dog, but that the background should somehow magically appear within half an hour. And I think it was just my reluctance to spend so long sitting staring at something that wasn't a dog or a face or the parts that really interested me. But the more I've grown to really love painting backgrounds and all sorts of random objects, the longer and longer I find myself spending on those areas. And really, if you look at it, the cushion takes up the majority of this painting, really, and it makes sense that I should spend a long time on what is a large portion of the whole painting. So don't feel bad if these sorts of things are taking you what seems like a long time. I would say the opposite. Spend longer, work slower, and really try and enjoy the process of these other objects in your paintings, and don't rush them. That's the main advice. You would think that perhaps over years you would get much faster at working, and in some ways I have become faster because I don't maybe spend as long struggling during a painting. But I actually have really slowed my work down. The more and more complicated my backgrounds become, the longer each piece takes me to create. And I really don't worry about how long I take to create something. Of course, you're trying to earn a living, so you're trying to always work as quickly or as economically as possible. But the way I look at it is, however long it takes, and I try to just allow plenty of time when I'm coding for a job and make sure that I have charged the appropriate amount extra if it has a complicated background, as I know that it's going to take me so many days extra. So take that into consideration if you're doing commissions. It's perhaps not just the dog, the main subject that you're coding for. Consider having an extra charge for complex backgrounds. And now just using some pastel on its side. I'm using mostly the Unison sticks in this piece. And using the pastel on its side, I can fill in quite a lot of area reasonably quickly. And I'm really just blocking in here, trying to get some pastel on the paper. And you can see this area to the very right of the painting. That part of the cushion has quite a lot of creases on it, and it's also in the shadow mostly because it's behind Gigi's leg. So I'm really experimenting with cooler colours in here, trying to bring in some blues and blue violets to hint at the shadows. And of course, the thing that will really give the whole cushion some weight is that shadow underneath the cushion and how it's sitting on that lovely textured carpet. I'll also show you some of the carpet later on in this tutorial. And just using some of the harder Faber-Castell stick to mark in some of those darkest creases in behind the paw. So there really are some very jet black areas, especially right under the cushion here. So I really want to create that depth in there. And now some BE35, just to continue that shadow under Gigi's head. Create that little scoop of crease that goes back in towards her forehead. And because I've got a few layers of pastel on that area of the paper, you can see that when I blend it, it smooths nicely into the layers underneath. But this was definitely a very new experience for me. I'm used to creating a lot of soft textures on the velour paper that I like to use. And if you've ever tried it, it's actually a dream to create fabrics and soft furnishings on, because the velour paper actually already feels like a soft fabric. It's quite, well, as the name suggests, it's quite like those velour trousers, those tracksuit bottoms you get. Feels a little bit like that. And I find that I can be really quite loose and painterly on there. The marks that I make with the pastels have a real softness to them, and it's quite easy to create soft textures on that paper. So it was interesting to try the Pastelmat, and I knew that I was going to have to work at it a little more to give it that soft, fuzzy appearance. So just starting to come in with the lighter colours and pick out some of the highlights around the deeper creases. But you'll see that this is a gradual process. I don't come in with my lightest colour or the colour that I want it to be right away. I'm working my way up gradually, trying to add nice warm brown earths. Nice warm colours that will shine through my top highlights. And this little seam, this edge to the cushion, just noticing where the light falls on it and where the shadow is in the crease. And the same with that similar edge around the bottom of the cushion. So you can see it looks pretty messy at this stage. If it's your first time trying something like this and you get to this stage, it can be very easy to get disheartened and think that it's not going right. It's only after years and years of doing lots of different challenges like this that I know it's got to go through an ugly stage. Everything does. But it can be really off-putting when you're working on something and you're really not sure if you're going in the right direction. This stage of a painting really doesn't help you to feel much better about it. But I think just now, with some experience, I know to persevere. You will eventually get it through this stage. And try not to let this distract you into thinking that you're doing something wrong. And I think that's possibly why I rushed through backgrounds in the past. I just felt I couldn't get them to look right quick enough. And then I would either give up or rush ahead and move on to the main subject, usually a dog or a person. But bit by bit, my frustration has given way to enjoyment. And I think I could literally paint cushions and fabrics, curtains, leather sofas. I really think I could spend days on those things now and not get bored. So you'll see now I'm trying to pick out some of those lighter creases on the cushion. And I'm not using too bright a colour here. You can see on the fluffy part of the cushion how bright that is over there. So I really want to save some of my lightest highlights for that area of the cushion. So it's all really nice warm brown earths that I'll use on this main part of the cushion, and save my white and grey 27 for the really bright areas. But then in contrast to that, this bottom right corner of the cushion, it's not really catching a lot of light in there, so I'm really trying to darken that down a little, create more shadows over on this right side. And for the next few moments, I go around using the side of the pastel, just blocking in more colour and trying to get a few layers of pastel onto the paper so that I can really start to move things around. So the cushion is starting to look a little more solid now, and I come back in with my BE27 just to add a bit of warmth down some of those creases where they're catching the warm light inside the room. And at this stage I'm really still experimenting with what combination of colours might give me a good realistic impression of this cushion. I'm not looking at it to be exactly like the photograph, it's not necessary, but as close as possible. And it's never really a matter of putting down just one colour to do that job. I'm using thin layers, blending them together. It's really similar to how I work on the velour, using thin layers of pastel and lots of different colours to try and replicate how the light dances off the object. And at this stage I decide that I haven't gone quite dark enough with the creases. So with my BE36 I'm coming back in and strengthening some of the creases a little at this early stage. And because I've got a little bit of pastel already on the paper, I can make those marks and blend them in quite well. I'm just trying to lean very lightly on the paper. It's very seldom that I lean heavily. Almost everything I do is thin layers. Sometimes my very top layer of highlights, I'll lean a bit heavier just to get a really strong bit of colour somewhere that I want it. But a lot of the time, it's very gently rubbing the pigment onto the paper. And now that I've got that darkness into the creases, I'll be able to soften that later on with the mid-tones and the highlights. And this was quite a tricky little corner of the cushion over here. When I eventually get Gigi's leg in, I really want it to appear like it's casting a good shadow over this part of the cushion. And at this stage I think I'm really just trying out some colours over here to see what might work as a shadow tone. So even for me, while I work on a piece, there's always a lot of trial and error. Each new piece is a new challenge. And I'm often painting things that I've never painted before. But the great thing about pastel is, of course, you can work over the top of your previous layer. So if you put a colour down that you're not quite happy with, you can always go over the top of it, as long as you've still got some tooth on the paper. Which is why, well, partly why I work in thin layers, because it allows me to build it up gradually. If I go too heavy-handed at the start, I'll fill the paper up and then it'll be very hard to apply more layers on top. But with these pastel papers these days, you really can put a lot of layers onto paper. Anytime I've tried the pastel mat, I haven't actually been able to fill the tooth of the paper. So it really does accept a lot of layers of pastel. And for anyone who's struggling to decide which paper to use, The way I feel about them at the moment, I still love the Hahnemuhl velour paper that I use often, but I'm really growing to love Pastelmat for the super amount of detail you can get. So I'm definitely incorporating it into my commissions these days. And any portrait where I feel I've got a lot of detail to capture, like a really detailed coat on a dog, I'm swaying towards the Pastelmat for that these days. But any piece where I've got quite an atmospheric or out of focus, or even foliage, or just a blurred background of some sort, I'm still really tempted by the velour. I can be a lot more painterly on it, and I feel a lot more comfortable creating the backgrounds on velour so far. But maybe this will come with time. I'm certainly going to keep experimenting with Pastelmat as I'm really impressed with its possibilities. But certainly for any smaller, really detailed portraits in future, I think Pastelmat might be my choice. And I've just completed a little baby portrait, my first attempt at doing skin tones on Pastelmat. And I'm going to release that next month as the main tutorial, so I'll be giving you lots of help on skin tones and human features for a change next month. So that will make a nice change from all the animals we've had on the page so far. I do love to paint a bit of everything, and I'm hoping that over time I can build a really good library of tutorials here that shows you a bit of everything and helps you not shy away from certain subject matters. As I said before, I really used to specialise in one area, but since I've taken more time to work on different subject matters, I get so much enjoyment now out of having a bit of variety on my work list. So I hope I can bring that into your life as an artist as well, help you try some subjects that you might have shied away from before. So now I make a start on that fluffy part of the cushion, and the more I look at it, the more it really could be the hair on an animal, or it's almost like a stripy zebra of some sort. And I'm always just trying to look at things, not get put off by how complicated it is, just break it down. And here I'm looking for the darker ridges, and I'm using a nice warm tone just to mark in where those shadowy ridges are. And I take that same colour just to run over the cushion again, give it a little bit more warmth on the top section. And each time I add a new thin layer and blend, it really starts to soften the effect. So with BV7, over in this corner where it's in shadow, just starting to experiment with the type of mark that I'm going to make to capture that fleecy top part of the cushion. And as I work the cushion with the big pastels, all the time I'm coming back in with some darker pastel pencils just to strengthen some of the dark seams, little creases around the edges of the cushion. And it's really all about making that contrast really high between your darkest areas and your lightest areas. So you want to be sure that if there's a really dark crease somewhere, that you focus on making that really dark so that it really pops out in comparison to your highlights. So I think just having a good broad tonal range within your work from dark to light really helps. So now I start to pick out some of the brightest areas on the creases on the main part of the cushion. And I'm just marking in where the line of the crease, where it's been hit by the light, and then trying to soften that line so that it's not a really hard line, really rubbing and blending it in. And at the moment it looks very hard, but I'm really just getting it placed, and then I'll come back and soften it more. And where those creases come out from behind Gigi's leg, that'll be really important later on when Gigi's leg is there to look like it's really squishing that part of the cushion. And again, using the side of the pastel, starting to bring that area that's been hit by light. Noticing where the shadow comes around the bottom of the cushion. And the lovely thing about the pastel mat I'm finding is how nicely the colours blend together, and it doesn't hurt your fingers, which is a bonus. When I was trying to blend on the UArt paper, I was using UArt 400, which is quite a sandy paper, so quite rough. And you certainly don't want to be blending too large an area with your fingertips. You have no fingerprints left. You make a very good burglar perhaps, but you don't really want that. So I would advise, if you're working on a rougher paper, to use some tools for blending, or even you can wear gloves. I do know some pastel artists who wear gloves, partly for blending, but some people also have a bit of a strange reaction to soft pastel on their skin, so just be aware of that. If you need to wear gloves, it's certainly possible to use pastel and not let it touch your skin. I just happen to be one of the people who love getting their hands messy. I have the most terrible fingernails after years and years of using pastel. Luckily, I'm not too worried about being very groomed, but certainly if you're very particular about your hands or your nails, you might want to consider using some more tools. This week I've been trying out the pan pastels, and with them you actually apply using little sponges and applicators, and I find those great fun to use and very useful for blending. So there's lots of things in the market that will help you with blending if you're not keen on using your fingers. I just can't help but use my fingers because I really love getting my hands messy. So now the top fleecy part of the cushion, and adding those ridges of highlight in is really going to help this cushion start to come to life. So I'm using Grey 27, and I'll just start to pick out some of those individual ridges that run from the edge of the cushion in towards Gigi. And it really is a bit like painting fur, this part. Sometimes when you're painting soft textures, you can liken it to something that you already enjoy painting. And I'm just keeping an eye on my photo reference, plotting in where each little ridge of highlight goes. And I don't continue with the grey 27 the whole way along these highlights. In some of the places closest to Gigi at the top of the cushion here, those highlights are a little bit more dull as they fall under her shadow a little bit. So it's always about saving the very brightest colour that you're using for the very, very brightest part of the painting. And really those highlights down towards Gigi's paw, that's really where it's brightest in the painting. So it's always about noticing those little subtle differences in tonal value and trying to find a colour to replicate that. But even with so little of it in, it already starts to take on the appearance of that thick, fleecy top. And of course the cushion is going to look a little strange before I get Gigi in herself. Her darkness behind the cushion will really help this pop. So at this stage I take my black Faber-Castell stick and I start to add in just a bit of the darkness that's going to be behind the cushion on Gigi. That's going to really help me get the brightest highlights to pop on the cushion, and just to let me see how dark it needs to be behind the cushion. And then I continue adding some highlight colours to each little line of the fleece. And I'm just looking at each individual little ridge, noticing that there's a highlight on the very top. And making little marks as I would if I were painting fur. And each texture that I paint is so different, from woolen jumpers to crochet blankets. There's a whole world of textures, and each one is quite a lot of fun to figure out. So hopefully in this series I can show you a lot of different textures that I enjoy painting. And just strengthening that seam. I don't want to make them too dark so that they really stand out. I still want it to appear quite soft. And I'm still looking for some of those little dark areas within the creases. Just making sure that I've gone dark enough before coming in with more mid-tones and highlights. And again, just using the BE36 on its side, you can see how soft a mark I can get on the Pastelmat just by very lightly rubbing it onto the paper. So although Pastelmat does feel very different to work on than the velour, I really am using most of the same techniques that I use on velour. These have been really useful experiments to me, as there have been a lot of different subject matters that I haven't tried out on other papers. So to take the techniques that I'm teaching you all and trying them out on different papers, it's really proving to me that the techniques work across the board. So you really don't need to be using the same paper as I'm using in my tutorials. Whatever paper you're using, you may have small adjustments to make it work, but on the whole, I've found that the techniques that I use work on any paper that I've lifted. The one added bonus of using the velour paper to create soft cushions is how soft the paper itself looks in person. When you create a soft fabric on velour, it really is so effective. I did find that I have to soften things, blend a bit more on the pastel mat before I can get that same soft appearance at the end. But the way in which I apply the pastel and the blending and the colour choices, all of that remains the same. And you can see that I work from my laptop screen just to the right. And I'm often quite zoomed in on an area just to try and see what colours are in there. I particularly like working off the laptop screen as I can zoom in and out as I need to. Hence, I have a very grubby looking pastel covered laptop. It's usually my dirtiest hand that operates the laptop, so I think everything in my house is covered in a layer of pastel dust though, so I'm not too fussy. It's either pastel dust or dog hairs in my house. I'm sure a lot of you can relate. So just coming down this crease, trying to spot where any little bits of light are hitting. On either side of the darkest crease, you'll usually get a little rim of highlight. And as I keep saying, it's really just about allowing yourself the time it takes to notice these little subtle things. Don't expect a background to happen in 10 minutes. You've really got to put the time into them. But once you do, then it's so rewarding and very satisfying to work on something like this. And at this stage, I'm just trying to decide if I've gone dark enough down this left side of the cushion. So you can see a really definite shadow coming down the left side. And the great thing about pastel, ideally you're working from dark to light. But as you add highlights and midtones, maybe you notice where you need some of your darks to be a bit darker. And it's such a versatile, flexible medium. You can always come back in and strengthen things as you go. So the next few moments of highlighting will really start to bring the cushion to life. And that seam running down the cushion needs a little highlight down the right side of it, just where the light's catching. So very gently, just scumbling on a bit of pigment. If you notice, I'm not bringing it down in one solid line, trying to make it a little more textured and natural looking, and then blending that into the layer below. I do hope you'll excuse any background noise in my audio today. It's extremely windy here in Tarifa in the south of Spain. It's one of the windiest towns in Europe. So on days like this, when I've got to do audio, it's a bit whistly outside. But I hope this comes out nice and clear for you anyway. Do let me know if you're having any issues with my videos. They're still very much a work in progress for me. I've upgraded a lot of my equipment now. I've actually just ordered a new camera, which is going to help me do some live demos. I'm hoping that within the next month or so, I'll be able to do a couple of hours worth of a live demo, which I'll invite you all to. But I've just been waiting to upgrade more of my equipment before doing things like that. And I hope that I can continue to learn and improve my audio and the quality of my footage. This has been a fantastic year one on Patreon. Thank you so much to those who have been here from the start and those who have joined me along the way. I hope you bear with me as I continue to increase the quality of what I give you, and also, as I said, offer some live demos. I've been wanting to do that from the start, so I'll try and get that organised for early in the new year. And we'll be able to organise a time when we can all meet up in the same place, and I'll do something live on the spot so you can ask me questions as I work. I think that would be a lot of fun. But I'd love to hear your ideas on this. Would you like that? Would you like to come and sit in on a live demo? Well, a virtual live demo. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. So coming in with the pastel pencil, again, just trying to add some darkness in here where Gigi is creating a lot of shadow. And to help me finish this fluffy part of the cushion, I really need some of that darkness in behind. And just having that contrast there instantly helps me see how bright I need to go with my highlights. So often when you're applying colours, they're really relative to the colour next door. So just getting an area of darkness in can really help you see how bright you need to go with your closest highlights. And once I finish the dog, I'll probably come back on this area and just touch up those little bits of fleecy cushion which will come up over Gigi's face a little bit. But for now, I'm trying to choose some colours that aren't quite as bright as my grey 27. So for example, A31 here, one of my favourite additional unison colours to use. Very, very useful, warm grey tones. You can never have too many shades and different hues of grey. And then coming back over each little ridge and picking out its brightest highlight on the top. So back down at the bottom of the cushion again. And it really is very, very dark in underneath the cushion. And the bottom of the cushion is in a lot of shadow too, so I'm just bringing that down in darkness a little bit more using the black Faber-Castell stick. And now that I've got those creases in the bottom corner darkened a bit more, I can come in with one of my lighter colours and start to pick out some of the highlights on the creases. Again, just rubbing the pastel on very lightly. Where there are creases, there are no hard lines, so you're really trying to feather the colour on very lightly and blend everything so that the edges are soft. So unlike the seams of the cushion, where you can create a very crisp line, where you're dealing with creases and folds in fabric, everything really needs to be soft, so no hard edges. And oops, I think I just dropped a pastel there. That might be a few extra sharp edges on that piece. Although underneath my easel I do have a mat so that most of the pastels I drop don't explode into a million pieces. But it's not always a bad thing dropping the odd pastel and it breaking. Saves me breaking them later. And just continuing to add some highlights around the base of the cushion. Just looking at each individual crease, where the darkest part is, where the light is catching. And there really is no shortcut to this. You've just got to pay attention to each area of the cushion. Just trying to get each crease and fold in the cushion, especially around Gigi's paw here, just to look like it's really being squished by the weight of her. And now for a bit of help on the carpet area. I'm taking the black Faber-Castell and my BE36 and just blocking that whole area in. So in between each little ridge of carpet, I can see a lot of darkness. So I lay that in first. And then I come back in. Again, I think in my head I'm pretending that this is like some kind of woolly dog that I'm painting. And I'm just using little marks like I would if I were painting fur. And I'll come up the colours gradually from dark to light. And you'll notice that I've slightly changed the colour of the carpet in the painting. I didn't want it to be quite as orange in the painting. I wanted it to have more of the brown colours that run through Gigi's fur. So just a little artistic license to improve the overall colour. But you can see that I'm just trying to leave plenty of gaps so that you see my dark layer underneath. But very quickly create some texture. And where it comes down at the top here, there's not so much shadow underneath the cushion. It's really down around this bottom corner of the cushion where I need to reapply some of my dark colour. And just strengthen some of that dark area in there again. And of course, after doing that, I can come round this edge of the cushion, which is sitting on top of it, and refine that edge, make it really nice and crisp. But that's step one of the carpet. I'll show you a little more of that soon. At this stage, it's just all about softening those creases, bringing the highlights up another bit. But really trying to make no hard lines on the cushion, having everything nice and soft. So I've used the sides of the pastels quite a lot in this piece. If you're using pan pastels, you might find it's really nice to be able to apply soft blocks of colour using their lovely spongy applicators. It really lends itself to creating soft edges. But I also find that using the sides of the pastels does just as well. And I really couldn't press any lighter at this point. Barely touching the paper as I apply some of the pastel. But over the next couple of minutes, I just continue to bring some of those highlights up a little more and make the 3D quality of some of those creases a little more prominent using my highlights. And now there's a little seam on this bottom piped edge of the cushion. And I can use my black Faber-Castell pencil to add that in and just strengthen some of those dark seams around it. It wasn't a very important detail, but I decided to add it. Sometimes you can be selective in what you choose to include and what you leave out. But now to finish some of that fleecy top up close to Gigi's face. Again, using my grey 27 and even some bits of white to pick out the brightest highlights and all those lovely off tints for the in-between parts of the ridges where it's in shadow. So it's a bit like when painting a white dog, trying to find lots of shades that help your brightest white really stand out. So now back onto the carpet again, and I'll just finish off with this. And I'm just again darkening down in this bottom corner. Trying to see those dark areas in between all the little bits of carpet that are catching the light. And rather than like before on the cushion where I'm using the side of the pastel, here I'm trying to make smaller marks, almost little dots or flat lines. Just looking for all those gaps in the carpet where it's dark. And then blending it all quite lightly into the layer below. But I'm really not being fussy in this part. It's just about giving the impression of it. Down in this bottom left corner, it's not going to be all that noticeable. When your eye glances at the portrait, it's probably not the first area that you'll look at. But the main thing I want to try and do is get the direction of the carpet, so the grain of it, how it flows, will really help it seem like the cushion is sitting on a flat surface. So a bit like when painting fur, just noticing what direction the little ridges of carpet are coming in. And then coming up my tones until I start to add some highlights on the top. And eventually coming up to my BE27. I'm keeping the carpet a much more yellowy tone than the oranges. Just trying to match in a bit more with Gigi. But you see, I'm not being very particular about the carpet. It's just really dots of colour, trying to make sure that I keep that shadow area under the cushion nice and dark. And then just out towards the left bottom corner, where there's a bit more light hitting, I can use some of my highlight colours. So we're nearing the end. I thought it would be an hour-long tutorial. It turned into an hour and 20 minutes. But I hope you don't mind seeing the extra bit of footage. And I hope that this really helps you the next time you've got a soft cushion in a portrait. I know I've had to paint a lot of cushions in the past, so I'm pretty sure it's something that you're going to come across if you're doing pet portrait commissions especially. So I hope this helps. I'll be back very soon with the next installment of textures tutorial. Until next time, happy pasteling!